Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Day late Tuesday night. Mike Elko, the Texas A&M Aggies make their first addition to the transfer portal class. Seventh-year senior quarterback Jacob Zeno coming back to the state of Texas, joining this Texas A&M program. Dill, if there's one thing I respect the hell out of for Mike Elko is how he addresses the transfer portal. Like I feel like he just gets it. You look at so many different coaches just trying to bring in as many players as they can. Mike Elko is very calculated, and he has a ton of intent in terms of what guys he wants to bring in. Is Jacob Zeno going to come in and start in 2025 for Texas A&M? I don't think so. But you look at the quarterback room and what it was looking like heading into 2025. It was Marcel Reed, who's going to be a redshirt sophomore. It was Miles O'Neill, who's going to be a redshirt freshman. And it was going to be Brady Hart, who's going to be a true freshman who reclassified from 2026. This was an extremely young quarterback room with not a ton of depth. What better way to bring a little veteran spirit into it than seventh-year senior quarterback Jacob Zeno, who back in 2023 at UAB was a damn good quarterback. Threw for over 3,000 yards, a 74% completion percentage. There's a lot to like about Jacob Zeno that we're going to talk about, but I also want to talk about Texas A&M's strategy as they address the transfer portal and talk about some targets that are emerging for Texas A&M because still, like from the early parts of the portal, Mike Elko ain't messing around. There are some heavy hitters making their way to College Station for visits. Fired up to get into it. Before we do, as always, the Texas A&M fans, a lot of which have been rocking with the boys going back 12 months ago, as Mike Elko was making a lot of noise last year in the portal. We can't thank you guys enough. The support means the world. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Much more importantly, let it fly in the comments section. Would love to hear some thoughts about Jacob Zeno, but I think more importantly, like some thoughts on where Mike Elko is going in the transfer portal. Dill, I'll kick it to you. You spent some time watching Jacob Zeno as the buzz around him committing to Texas A&M kind of picked up. Initial reactions to this kid.
And I think you said it. Like, I do not think they're bringing him in to be the starter. I still think that's Marcel Reed's job. He acquitted himself really well, in my opinion. And frankly, like, not the easiest of circumstances because I looked, the wide receiver room probably wasn't good enough for him. And also the offensive line, as much as they ran block or were good blocking the run, were not a great pass protecting unit. So with all that, I did think Marcel Reed gave them enough to make you think he's going to be the guy. But I think when you go in with redshirt sophomore being your oldest guy, you probably wanted to bring in a backup. And I like the idea of bringing in a guy who fits the Marcel Reed skill set a little closer than maybe some like a Miller Moss. Like Miller Moss and Marcel Reed don't do the same thing. So I don't think you really need to change your offense a whole lot with Jacob Zeno if he come in ever.
And a veteran. Like that's kind of like it doesn't get much veteran than Jacob Zeno's going into it. He's got a PhD at this point at the college level. You have to have this conversation in the scope of Marcel Reed, because I think this move is telling us they are confident in Marcel Reed, and we just wanted to bring an experienced backup to provide some veteran experience to the room. And Dill, I would agree with you. Like Marcel Reed, it was not an easy circumstance for him to come into. They spent all of spring practice and fall camp thinking Connor Wigman was the guy. They kind of built this offense around Connor Wigman. And Marcel Reed's got some different traits that he brings to the table. And although you saw some young quarterback stuff from Marcel Reed, there are still some things that you like. I'm just going to read off some things that kind of popped to me. When he was kept clean for Texas A&M, 73% completion percentage, 6 touchdowns. Dill, he was only kept clean 55% of the time. He was under pressure, according to PFF, 45% of the time. That checks out on the film. You said it. They ran block pretty well. They weren't necessarily the best in pass protection. And so I think as you get the offensive line right, which I trust Adam Cushing 100% to do, he'll be better. And I think secondly, Dill, push the ball down the field quite well. 20-plus yards down the field, a 44% completion percentage for 6 touchdowns. I liked what you saw from a young quarterback that came into a system that wasn't built for him. I think you're going to see a lot better of a version of Marcel Reed in 2025 as you get the full offseason to really build this offense around Marcel Reed. Now, the conversation here now needs to be trying to change to we got to put some weapons around in this Texas A&M offense. So one of the biggest problems that Texas A&M had were these pass catchers, they weren't high. It wasn't a high-end SEC wide receiver. And if you want Marcel Reed to have that success, you have to build that. Dill, let's talk about, I think, both of our top, one of our, at least the top three, if not one, wide receiver available. Casey Concepcion going to make it to College Station. It sounds like Texas A&M is going to make a big run at him. I know you're a huge fan of him, so I'll let you sell the people on him.
I mean, probably one of the most versatile players I've ever seen with my two eyes play college football. And that'll be interesting. You got a guy in the room already in Terry Bussey, who's exceptionally versatile. Casey Concepcion, I think, is proven more as a wide receiver. I think that's probably fair to say. I mean, you go back to his true freshman year at NC State when they had the infrastructure around him to make some things happen. He was so dynamic. And that, when I say versatile, I feel like people almost like discount the fact that he's an elite wide receiver in his own right. Like, he can make plays down the field. He can get vertical. He can do all those things. Now, I do think he gives you a little bit of what Jabri Barber gave you, and obviously he was a huge weapon for Marcel Reed. So I do think a guy like Casey Concepcion, as much as he can get vertical, his specialty is definitely working in the kind of the way Jabri Barber worked, but probably with a little more athletic upside.
What stands out to me about Casey Concepcion is what he does with the football in his hands. And to be honest, outside of Terry Bussey, was there anybody, especially with Ruben Owens getting hurt, was there anybody, like outside of maybe Marcel Reed, who when they had the football in their hands, you were kind of holding your breath and saying, like, there might be game-changing play here? Not really. They need more guys like that. And that's what, Casey Concepcion as a true freshman led them in had over 100 targets, by far led them in receiving yards, also led that NC State team in rushing yards. Like, at the end of the day, NC State was doing everything they could to get the football into this kid's hands. And when it happened, good things normally happen for NC State. Texas A&M needs more of those kind of guys. And talk about Terry Bussey going into year 2, Casey Concepcion going into year 3. That is going to be an extremely difficult wide receiver room to deal with if you're an opposing defense. And I think most importantly, like some of the RPO quick game that Coach Colin Klein wants to run, these guys fit that. Dill, here's another different kind of wide receiver, Nick Anderson, also getting a lot of buzz around Texas A&M. Now, Nick Anderson, a different flavor. If you could bring in a guy like Nick Anderson and then a guy like Casey Concepcion, that just completely changes what your wide receiver room is. Nick Anderson is, I think, kind of what we want to see from Noah Thomas. You know, that big-bodied boundary wide receiver that can work vertically down the field. Now, the knock on Nick Anderson, at least for me, is one, kind of a one-dimensional route runner, like only really a vertical guy right now. And there's only really 1 year of production, right? Didn't play much as a true freshman, came on in a big way in 2023, averaged over 21 yards per catch. You talk about trying to get more explosive in the passing attack. Nick Anderson will do that, and then was hurt all year last year. I just talked a lot, so I'll give you the floor here. Nick Anderson, how are we feeling about it?
And you said it. And obviously you look like Noah Thomas was the only guy who gave you a semblance of down the field passing attack. I think when Cyrus Allen came, when you looked at his La Tech film, you were hoping he could be that guy because I think he did do a good job. But that just at the end of the day, it didn't really translate into the power or the SEC. Right?
Yeah.
Obviously, Nick Anderson's been able to do it. Now, he's certainly a much bigger projection than some of the guys you're looking at. Like,
Agreed.
He has dominated college football in the way a guy like Casey Concepcion has. But you look, I think you pair him up with Noah Thomas, you do start to build out the semblance of what you're looking for in terms of a downfield passing attack. Because that was one thing that I feel like they could have gotten to more with Marcel Reed. He did hit his plays down the field when he had them.
And it's so important in terms of how Texas A&M wants to run this offense. Like, we want to run the football. And then if you are going to bring some bodies in to stop the run, put another safety in the box, play with one high, well, we got two guys on the boundary that can win vertically. I don't know if there was a guy in Texas A&M's offense that was striking fear into defensive coordinators in terms of what we can do vertically down the field. Last one, and arguably the most exciting one, Dill, Micah Hudson. I'll probably take this one because this was a kid that, look, out of high school, there was so much talk about Jeremiah Smith, Ryan Williams, Cam Coleman. I was putting Micah Hudson in that category. I thought Micah Hudson was an absolute dude coming out of high school. Don't really know why he didn't get a ton of opportunity at Texas Tech as a true freshman. This kid, from a trait standpoint, is so talented. I mean, his best asset to me is what he does with the football in the air. He's not the tallest frame, but this kid at the catch point is next level stuff. And then also yards after the catch, he's kind of built like a running back, like 6 foot, 200 pounds, thick lower half, can do a lot after the catch. This is a projection because, again, you haven't seen him do it at the collegiate level. If you maximize this kid, he's a wide receiver 1 in the SEC. There's no question in my mind. Look, and again, going back to what we talked about, Mike Elko is going to look at the transfer portal and say, we're not just going to go out and get every single guy in the book. We're going to go get guys that we need and feel like fit our roster. That's kind of what you're seeing. Heavy emphasis on wide receivers, which needs to get upgraded. We'll update the conversation on the offensive line because I do think that is a growing concern in terms of depth in that room. But the defensive line, like Mike Elko's already getting busy. I think one of the more intriguing names for both of us is former Florida defensive lineman Kelby Collins, who this staff has a relationship with going back to his time at Florida. I know you're a fan of Kelby Collins back when we saw him as a true freshman. Kelby Collins kicking around with Texas A&M. How are we feeling about that one?
I mean, they just got to figure out where to put him on the field so he can get some consistency. Because you certainly saw the flashes. Now, I think Florida was trying too hard to essentially make him an edge rusher. That's just not where I see him. I don't think he has that burst that he'll ever be great there. But you look at having the athleticism he has at the size he has, I think he can be really good in the middle, especially on those pass rush downs, which, again, you certainly want in that room. If you're Texas A&M, losing some of the guys like a Shamar Turner that you're going to lose this year.
Yeah, and especially like when you look at Kelby Collins' frame. Like, I know he was only 270-ish pounds coming into Florida. But like this guy, he's got like a broad shoulder, big lower. Like he's a guy that you could get up to 300 pounds, maintain that athleticism. I'm kind of with you. It felt like a little bit of a mismanagement by Florida here because they started him out on the edge, and the edge film was all right as a true freshman, and then they kicked him in the inside, didn't really get the opportunity on the inside. If you can find a position, stick with it, and develop him there, there's some high upside there. And then one other cornerback that I just want to talk about real quick because he's kind of my guy, Julian Humphrey. No doubt Mike Elko's looking at him and saying, one, my take on Julian Humphrey, Dale, is you're getting a quality football player. You don't start 10 games for the Georgia Bulldogs if you're not a quality cornerback. You could potentially be getting an absolute dude. And I think Mike Elko's looking at him like, let me just get my hands on him and let me develop him. He's 6'1", 195 pounds, 10.55 in the 100-meter dash coming out of high school. Every single physical trait that you want, Julian Humphrey has played decent football, but certainly hasn't played football that I think he can play. His best football, what I'm trying to say is his best football is in front of him, and I trust Mike Elko just about as much as anybody in terms of getting the best out of a guy like Julian Humphrey.
You know, I look at what he did with guys like Des Ricks early in his career this year and how those guys came along, because that, to me, was arguably the best part of this Texas A&M defense. He went from like being the worst, and obviously brought in a lot of transfer portal guys, but that secondary I thought played elite football. I do think it's not a bad thing to add a little bit more length in that type of body frame into it, because they do have some of those type of guys. But again, I don't think it's bad to – I look at a guy like Javen Thomas or a Will Lee, like add a little bit more size, a little bit of a guy who can deal with those bigger wide receivers maybe a little better.
And I'm interested to see where Texas A&M goes because I know they're kicking it with Prince Will You, and I think with Nick Gordon, who we kind of knew would go to the NFL draft, but then Shamar Stewart was kind of that guy was like, kind of hope he come back for one more year. He's going to the NFL as well. You want it. I'd say depth was maybe a concern anyways for Texas A&M up front. Like they were very good in that first line, probably didn't get as much as from the 2s and 3s as they wanted. I think Mike Elko wants a little bit better of depth heading into 2025. So look at what Mike Elko's been doing in the transfer portal on the high school recruiting trail. Line of scrimmage on both sides. The offensive line needs some work too. I'd expect Mike Elko to bring some guys in. We'll talk about that as some players emerge. We'll close it out there. Yeah, I appreciate you guys rocking with it. Going to be a busy next couple of days and weeks. All the support means the world, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.